Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Eric Perry. I am the social media coordinator and webmaster for ACES. I'm joined here by Dr. Marty Jencius. Um, I am also a clinical faculty member at Southern New Hampshire University, and I'll go ahead and let Dr. Jencius introduce himself as well.
Hello, everybody. I hope you are faring well during this situation, this pandemic that we're dealing with, which is drastically changing the ways in which we have to work and the ways in which we experience connecting with other people. Thank you for coming today. I'm an associate professor of counseling at Kent State University, and technology and teaching, and combining the two has been sort of my thing. When I started as an assistant professor. So I certainly do not have all of the answers. I don't think Eric does either. This is why we wanted to kind of make this a penny tray, where you leave a penny if you have some ideas, and you pick up a penny if you need some ideas. So you're not going to get a series of slides, and you're not going to get a series of distinct steps in order to do something. Instead, you're going to hopefully get from the group of 100 plus people here ideas on how they might be handling the situation that you're facing in your counseling teaching, and in some cases, counseling practice. So I'm not sure where to start with this, Eric. Do you have ideas of how to get the group going? We're beginning to see some things in the chat room come up as questions of what people hope.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start by saying a couple of things, just housekeeping stuff, and maybe as I do, if anyone has something they'd like to share or like to offer to the group, go ahead and message us in the chat, and we'll bring you on to talk to everybody. So these webinars, we're recording all 4 of them that we have scheduled. We have 2 today, 2 on Wednesday. All those videos are going to be posted to the public on the acesonline.net website. I've included the link here in the materials section, but if you can't find it, just go to acesonline.net and you'll see a big banner that we put up for you to access those videos. So those are going to be available to everybody to listen to and watch asynchronously at any point in time. So I know there's been a lot of questions out there, and I don't mind sharing a little bit or responding to some of these as folks warm up to the idea of, getting on and sharing their own experiences. Is there one that you found particularly interesting, Marty, that you wanted to start with?
One that I've seen a lot is the idea of how do you teach sort of counseling technique courses? How do you do skill-based courses?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of ideas and there's a lot of spaces around this. The first thing that I come to is to thinking about the types of technologies that you need to have in place to do that remotely. And depending on the type of institution you're in and what you have available to you, a lot of the LMSs that are out there now, the learning management systems like Blackboard and Brightspace, D2L, have integrated video capability. They might not have that synchronous capability, but some of them do as add-ons. But they have spaces for you to at least be able to post videos and lecture and provide some of that instructional piece in terms of skills. When looking at recordings, there's tons of services that most of us in most institutions have access to and can actually provide that access to students. I'm thinking of a couple now are platforms that are like Zoom, Skype, which is now a lot of folks are transitioning to the Microsoft Teams software, which it just includes a Skype. There's Ring Central. There are several different softwares out there that integrate with an LMS like Blackboard or Desire to Learn. BlueJeans is one, Bongo or Desire to Learn. Bongo or UCU, as it was formerly called, are a couple ones that I think about. Yes, and Dr. Stinchfield had just mentioned in the chat Google Meet. Google's a huge platform in terms of being able to provide that meeting space. So those are just some of the technological tools I think of off the top of my head. from a pedagogical approach, I think there's a lot more that we can talk about there. But just in keeping with the technology, it's going to be a day. Technology-based tools, Marty, were there ones that I was missing or that you had on the top of your head?
Oh, well, I'm using a lot of Zoom.
So,
And the idea that students, well, first of all, for educators, I have a paid account, so I have the full access of whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. And I've noticed there was a something published about educators who are facing where their schools are facing closure because of the virus situation. You can apply at zoom.us/education, I believe is the link. And you can apply there and then get a unlimited time for videos that you want to create. Usually Zoom is held to 40 minutes.
mhm.
So if you wanted to do some extensive class meeting using live video, you could do that synchronously with Zoom. I'm looking into, although I haven't had a lot of experience with Collaborate on Blackboard. I'm trying to set up some rooms in a class where I'm going to break them into small discussions online and then come back in a larger room. So we might be using the Collaborate that they have associated with Blackboard. But I'm doing a lot of stuff with Zoom, including recording video. There was a question that came up later in the query that was about how, and I think it was from Dr. Sinchfield, it was how do you manage to record videos and then how do you manage to upload them?
Mm.
The method that I would suggest is WeTransfer. So your student or students could create those videos and then they could be sent to you directly through a WeTransfer download. Trying to load them onto a learning management system like Blackboard can be rather clumsy.
Mhm.
So you want to go with some other service. I know I was just on another video meeting where we're trying to do some training videos and we're going to use a shared Google Drive folder where people can add those videos to the Google Drive folder. Um, can you speak more about transfer? Are you talking about WeTransfer, I assume? WeTransfer.com is a site that you can go to and you can put in the email address of who you want to send the video to. And then you upload the video or any large document. I use it for transferring large audio files. But it will then upload it off of your system and send the person a link that says you have a video or document or file waiting for you. You click on the link and that person will be able to then download that document or file, large files. So I mean, that's what its intention is, and you will get a notice that that file has been downloaded by the person.
There's another question that popped up quite a few times about HIPAA compliance and confidentiality. So generally, when we use tools like this and we want to teach skills or we're using it as a part of an academic activity, we want to make sure that the students are they're not using real plays, right? That these are role play scenarios. Um, in terms of working with clients in practicum and internship experience, HIPAA compliant software looks very different. Most of the tools that we're talking about now that can be used pedagogically and securely to the degree that they would be acceptable for FERPA, but they would not be HIPAA compliant. Um, those are different tools that we would have to talk about, and generally, unfortunately, can be much more expensive and much more large scale. So, if there are more ideas in terms of HIPAA compliant tools, please be sure to post those in the chat. But, that's my initial perception of it is most of the tools that we're talking about here are, acceptable for use in a pedagogical realm and in terms of a role play scenario. But it wouldn't be HIPAA compliant in terms of, real client-based activities. So I'm just getting caught up with the chat here.
Yeah, I just checked in terms of Zoom. Zoom is HIPAA compliant as long as you get into a business associates agreement with them with that process. So,
Okay.
and you'd have to, yeah, I see now. I see a comment here about the university signing a BAA with Zoom.
So Zoom might be a viable option then. Um, we use an internal LMS tool called Bongo or UCU, which is HIPAA compliant. So depending on what your university or your institution has access to, you might have something already in place that doesn't require you to go through those steps. And sometimes even if your program is traditional and on ground, they may have this tool for other programs. It's just not been being used with yours. And a lot of times the way the licensing works with some of these, it's not a user-based account, it's an LMS, an institutional account. So oftentimes it just takes that administrative part going out and saying, hey, is this something we can use and have added to our courses that we can access? So it's possible that you may have access to software or may have access to some of these tools that you don't even know about that other programs are using. So it can be a good idea to make contact if you have instructional designers, if you have curriculum developers, or even just your IT staff to see what types of tools are being used within your LMS, your learning management system. And somebody had mentioned here, as I think is a really good idea, sometimes the role plays that we've put out there, particularly if we don't want a real play, we just want them practicing skills, we've had them do these fictional characters, right? We've given them kind of, pop culture characters to play rather than having some kind of, scenario that they'd have to make up.
The chat is such a small window and so much stuff is coming up quickly. Every time I look at something, it shifts me to another. But I'm seeing some folks reporting that DocsMe and VC are also HIPAA compliant. GoReact is HIPAA and FERPA compliant. Google Meet is HIPAA compliant if they have a professional G Suite package. And EHR Software Simple Practice is also a HIPAA compliant video platform. And you can set Zoom. The user needs to make sure that it's manually activated on the encryption feature. And I see that on my screen when I see Zoom. There's a little lock that comes up in the upper right-hand corner to maintain that it is encrypted. What I've been watching with the board and with licensure boards, they don't know how to handle this at this point. In Ohio, the state that I'm in, the board has said that they want to take into consideration that university systems are closing down, which makes it difficult for students, whether they are in an on-site clinic or whether they are in a a outplacement in a practicum or internship, that that they don't know how to quite deal with their continuing education hours. And they have made a statement that says that student trainees, counselor trainees, as long as they are being supervised, that telemental health is an option for them. Now that raises questions in terms of, are the students trained in telemental health? How will the clients access them? Things like that. And as the supervisor trained in telemental health. So all of those come into question, but the Ohio said CTs can do telemental health. But again, the systems aren't quite set up for them. So what they're going to do with students whose internship sites and practice sites have basically been shut down in terms of their continuing hours, they haven't quite come to a solution of what to do with students. Will they accept lesser hours? Will they extend the opportunity to get those hours? None of that stuff is clearly identified by the Ohio board at this point. What they're saying is we're working on a solution, but it will kind of depend on how many hours they have left. So you might see different solutions, at least in Ohio, for different students, depending on the remainder of the hours that they have left in their training, their supervised training.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point to talk about that, this is going to vary state by state. It's going to vary based on how long this goes on. Some of these boards themselves are just determining that, they're canceling their meetings and determining how they're going to meet to make these decisions. So I think it will have to be watchful for things like that. I'm noticing in the chat, a lot of folks are asking if we can provide a document or notes in terms of what's been listed here. And we're going to post the recording of the video and do plan as well to take some notes from what's here and post those, although it may take us a few days.
Can we export the chat as a text file? Do you know if we can do that here?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we can do that. It
Cool.
might make things easier.
Yep. Because the video for this is going to be really boring.
Yeah, yes, it is. Okay, so there are a couple. Yeah, we'll definitely post the text file of the chat here, so then everybody can get credit as well for those ideas they've given. Is anybody open to joining the conversation and sharing a little bit? Feel free to post in the chat if you are, and we can bring you on. I mean, we're very entertaining, but always willing to bring on more voices here. So a question came in and said, can you talk about synchronous versus asynchronous content and process for non-field placement classes? So just in terms of, and maybe I'll ask a clarifying question, in terms of what's, what types of pedagogical processes are you looking for? I'll just share my experience, I guess, really quickly. In terms of asynchronous content, I like to post instructional lectures and demos and different things. I use a tool called Screencast-O-Matic a lot. It's free to record 15 minutes of webcam or your screen or both to be able to do just real brief, focused lectures and skills practice that they can watch and then go apply. So that's part of the asynchronous content that I like to give to them. I don't mind the 15-minute limit, but you can obviously pay to get more time. So I give them a real quick kind of preview of the skills and what I'd hope to see, or a demonstration or a brief lecture or a combination of those, and then let them kind of move forward with what they're going to do. There are a couple other suggestions here in the chat as I started talking about it. Snagit is a great resource as well for screencasting. It's really simple to use. So that's
Zing is also a good one.
What was that, Marty?
Zing is
Zing.
Also a good one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very cool.
I've got a situation that arose kind of unique. I've been teaching psychopathology online since 2006. And this semester we had a faculty member who was out for surgery and was going to teach psychopathology live face-to-face. And they came back to me and they said, can you teach this? And I'm like, well, I guess I have to now switch everything I do online back to live, which challenged me because I wanted to come up with different things to do in the classroom. It's a good challenge because I came up with some ideas about doing treatment teams and having them work as a whole class, trying to collaborate around case examples. But now we've all switched back to online, and I don't want to lose that. So I'm trying to come up with an online parallel to be able to do that in a synchronous fashion. I'm looking at Collaborate. I'm looking at possibly using Zoom for that. But I'm trying to come up with some alternatives to do that small group work in a synchronous format to do it. I'm switching from online to live back to online again, but trying to take some of those online, one of those live components and try and reproduce it online. And some people, David said in Zoom, we used breakout rooms for case discussions.
Yeah, and I'm just catching up with some of the chat here too. I think, like you talked about, Marty, there's pedagogical differences in how we deliver the content, and then how we put those activities together. Somebody had asked about, putting together a 10-hour service learning assignment that involved volunteering, and pulling that into an online environment. Well, you can do a lot of those same things, provided we're not on quarantine, and still allow them to submit that reflection or even integrate video or presentation as a part of that reflection, right? So it does open things up in a certain way, in that you have this online platform or environment to widen the amount of content or the types of content you can allow students to submit. And I know I missed somebody that wanted to share, and I was going to try and get on here.
Yvette was going to talk about Theranotes. TheraView.
Okay. So Yvette, you can unmute your mic if you'd like to join us.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Sure can.
Okay. We tested out a program called TheraView last summer and used it with our practicum students. And it's basically a video-based micro skills program where students watch a short clip of someone that is playing the role of a client, and they respond back with whatever micro skill that we're using, and it's videotape. So then the instructor and other students can actually give them feedback on it. So they have, I think, about 200 different video clips. They have several different topics covered where they already have the rubric for how you grade it. You can go in and change the rubric and edit it for particularly what you want to look at. For example, they'll have one on open-ended questions, demonstrating empathy. They have them on challenging. Are you doing your basic counseling skills with minimal encouragers? And you can develop your own videos and put it in the system. It's not perfect, but we've even figured out a way to have the students watch the video clip that is being presented to them and record themselves while they're watching and what they're doing while they're watching it, and give their response that's recorded in the system. It's all done online, so what happens when I go in as an instructor is I can go in, their video is there, I can get it, I can look at it and grade it and give them feedback after the student has already gone in and watched themselves and provided their own critical discussion of what they did. And then we can share back and forth. In class, I used team-based learning, which was helpful because every group of 5 would give each other feedback on the micro skill. But moving that online is all accessible. We've had no glitches with it. So for the micro skills portion, it works extremely well. So I'm going to be playing with actually extending their counseling session through that system and doing that for my helping skills class.
That's great. I've seen it before. They've been at conferences and kind of demoed it, but I've never actually talked to anybody who used it. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about it. And I don't really know what it looks like in terms of cost, which I imagine would be my dean's first question.
It was, I can tell you that. Every student buys it like a textbook.
Okay.
When we bought it this semester, every student purchased it. It was considered one of their texts, and it was $59.95, I think, per student.
Okay. No, that's really helpful,
And,
right, to determine whether or not that's
and
something.
I use it as one of their texts along with another textbook. They have really, every time I go on, they've added stuff to it. They're working on the platform and the features. It's not perfect by any means, but it's a great way. Students can re-record themselves as many times as they want to. They can go in and do every video. There are 3 videos provided per skill. They can go in and do 3 different scenarios with different clients on the same skill. There are plenty of, it's very culturally diverse as far as the clips for the clients that are, actors. They have all different kinds of situations. They've really, and they're working on it all the time. And we've had absolutely, other than getting them initially set up, there's been a glitch or two once in a while, but it's worked extremely well.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. One more question from me, and this is just because I'm finicky and maybe a little bit of a control freak with my course. Am I able to add my own videos, much in the same way I talked about earlier, if I want to give some demonstration?
Yes, you are also able to, and you'd have to get the student's permission, but let's say a student just did such a great job. You can mark that as a kind of, I forgot what they call it, but kind of like an ideal response.
Okay.
And you can put that into your course because you're creating your own course as an instructor. You're pulling
Okay. That's
from
awesome.
their series and you're creating your own course, and you can modify what you want to have in each of your modules. You can modify how that's done as far as your rubrics go to grade it, the assignments that you put in with that. It takes a little bit of playing around to get used to it. And like I said, they're constantly really adding to that. I've got some suggestions to them about how to do it where you can really make it a little bit more robust as far as the interaction piece goes. But for micro skills, when you're trying to teach people, can you do a restatement, to different forms of content? Can you do a reflection of feeling right on the spot? And having them practice. So if you've got a student that's really struggling with a skill, you can add more and more video clips to them to have them do it. I've also used it in a way where if I've had students who have a real difficulty with responding in certain situations, I'll give them more of those kinds of situations. So it's not perfect, but it really is for, basic skills that you really want them to practice and be able to see themselves, and you can see it and grade it. It's been very helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing, Yvette, and being the first one willing to raise their hand.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And hi, Marty. Haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah. Well, I haven't been around in a long time. Now you're not going to see me for at least another 30 to 60 days. I'm taking a look at some of the comments. There was a question that recently came up about group class. How do you run a group class? And that's a scenario that I'm facing. Let me describe. I'm basically using Zoom, and one of the limitations of Zoom is for me is that I can only have one room open at a time. So I can't create multiple rooms and just dump students in there at the same time. So in my class, we have the students divided into 3 groups, and the class runs about 3 hours. So what I've set up is a schedule for the different groups to meet in Zoom, and have created separate group rooms for them. Again, none of them can overlap because you can't have them on top of each other. You can have one group running at a time. So I've split the class over those 3 hours at their regular meeting time into their 3 group sessions. The rest of the material that we have in class in terms of the lecture and identification, I have been a participant in trainings that have multiple. Oh yeah, well, that might be the case. Angela just said she's been a participant in trainings that have had multiple simultaneous breakout rooms, but maybe not for the price that I'm paying for it.
Right, I was going to mention that it is possible, but it's a higher tier. So I'm looking now to see what that looks like.
So I am breaking them out into separate hours, and they're doing that. And then as a class, we're doing the rest of the work either through asynchronous lectures, those types of approaches in terms of dealing with the content.
And I took a look here to see, it looks like the small and medium business or enterprise classes you can use for to have multiple rooms, essentially multiple hosts, so that you can supply those rooms, and those go for about $20 a month per host. So, you know, it would increase your cost pretty significantly, I think, to have those additional rooms, but still not out of the realm of possibility if you needed maybe 3 or 4. So an interesting point that somebody brought up here, and I've heard um, and have had several folks contact me about, is the technological infrastructure. There's been some concern that with everybody online and a fair amount of people engaging in these types of processes, will the systems be able to support it? You know, we have 119 people in this room, and all with different varying internet connections and speeds and locations. It's definitely a topic of concern that's come up. Some of the stronger platforms, I think, are going to be more utilized. One of the reasons I like Zoom so much and talk about Zoom so much is that I have students from across the country in rural areas with very tenuous kind of internet connections, right? And it has one of the lowest required connection speeds to maintain a stable video connection. So I tend to use it over other platforms for that reason. So some of the things you want to look at too is those minimum requirements for the programs that you have and whether or not those are going to be accessible to your students. If you live in an area or, you know, where you know most of your students are local and connection speeds can really vary, you want to look at some of those services that require less of a connection speed or have less bandwidth issues.
Yeah, again, that's where I'd go if you have a learning management system. Built into some of them are things like Collaborate and Collaborate Ultra, and those might work really well for small group breakouts if you need them and you don't have access to other forms. I'm back on a question here. Well, I just want to acknowledge that Leela Roach said to us, I don't know much and I'm here to learn, although we have figured out some things in terms of blue jeans for counseling skills class. And I've never heard of blue jeans before. Have you heard about it?
Yeah, Blue Jeans is actually it's another service that's like Bongo or UCU, that's it has an integrated LMS tool that you can use. Um, it's fairly user friendly. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. There's breakout rooms. You can set up, students can set up their own rooms. Doesn't need, the instructor doesn't need to do it. It's a, like I said, fairly user friendly type of tool that's integrated within an LMS generally.
And then another question, and this came, I'm combining two comments, one from Kathleen McCleskey and one from Tracy Stinchfield, wanting to know about when you're shifting a class from face-to-face to online, what is kind of the reasonable amount of time? Do you do 2.5 hours and 2.5 hours, or do you do, you know, is it 2 for 1? Is it 1 for 2 in terms of what you can expect for them to be able to do? And particularly, looking at videos and sustaining time on videos, because if you go to like Canopy, you can find some great group session videos that are 5 hours long. So do you have any idea about the reasonableness of what you can do for assignments?
Yeah, so I share a little bit of my experience. Prior to becoming a counselor educator, I was an instructional designer and curriculum developer, and still do some of that work now. You know, the popular guidance around how long someone can sustain attention when they're not actively engaged in something, when it's not an interactive activity, is between 8 and 11 minutes for an adult. So this huge focus on these kind of micro-based learnings and trainings and just-in-time activities and those types of things. If you're doing something asynchronously, if you're providing instruction, particularly online, that folks are going to generally view when they're otherwise distracted, they're at home, they're not present or engaged, you want to keep those as short as you can, or break them up into bite-sized pieces, right, so to speak. When you're talking about a synchronous activity, something like a class meeting, you want to keep kind of the same schedule that you have with your in-class activities that you would face-to-face, right? So you want to have bathroom breaks. You want to have some interactivity, some types of polls or questions, or engage the class to respond to you. So you really have to have a level of comfort with the technology to be able to, put that synchronous time in, so that folks are really engaged and they're going to be able to stay level and present with you. Asynchronous activities can be as long as you like, provided that you take some steps to really break it down and make it more manageable. At least, that's always the kind of pedagogical approach that I've taken in terms of course development.
One of the things that I've become aware of is the difficulty that students have in some students have in sustaining attention over a period of time. They're just, as much as we see them on their phones, they're just not as able to sustain a lot of attention on their computers as during class time. And we have no way of really gauging their attention and how long they're actually paying attention when they're online. One of the things that our university has said to us, and this might be the case of other universities, that if your class meets at Thursday afternoon at 4:30, you can't have class just because we're online. You can't have synchronous meetings at other times during the week. That your synchronous meetings have to fall within that period of time with the class, because that's when students expect it, and that's when their schedule is supposedly set aside as not to disrupt it. So if you're going to do that kind of synchronous work over our class meets 2.5 hours a week or so, it's going to require that you shift it up and switch it up a bit, because it's going to be difficult for them to stay focused at a screen for that period of time.
And it's funny that you talk about that, because there's tools built into your LMS to help you gauge attention. They can be really helpful with that. As an example, the software that we're using here, Go to Training, there's a little icon that I can see next to everybody's name that lets me know whether or not they actually have this window open. So some folks may be listening to us, and as I'm talking about it now, I see some guilty ones returning back, and their little triangles going away. But it's funny, because as most people, when they get online, they're multitasking. They're doing something else in the background. They're listening. I do it all the time. I have a podcast playing my headphones on, and I'm doing, some innocuous work that doesn't require my full attention. But some folks will fade in and out, right? A lot of your LMSs too will give you a report, particularly for asynchronous activities, with how long your student has spent in the course on a particular activity, on a video. If you post a video that's, say, I don't know, 20 minutes long, you can go look at that activity and see that the student was logged in for 3 or 4 minutes. Granted, it's only giving you a snapshot of information. They could have been logged in for 20 and completely gone and just left the video playing. But it does give you some ideas. There are some ways to kind of gauge how much attention that you have. And some of these synchronous tools will even let you know who's paying attention, who's got another window up, who's being really attentive to the conversation right now. And that's, part of the reason why, if you can, depending on the size of your group, share video, you can start gauging that much in the same way you would as you were looking out at your classroom to see whether or not they're being attentive. But it definitely takes a different approach and a different set of eyes and tools to think about.
I've got a question that came up from Dominique that says, what about case presentations for prac or internship? And how would one do that? So I presume you're talking about cases of clients they're dealing with, and kind of how do you do that in an online platform, and how would you do that protecting the confidentiality of the case that they're presenting?
Yeah, I mean, the first idea that comes to mind for me would be one of those synchronous tools that we talked about, that they could record in, particularly in something like Zoom. Um, Something to think about too is where you save that information. So if you're recording in Zoom, students would really need to be instructed that they don't want to save these locally. They don't want to save them on flash drives. They want to use the cloud, and they want to send that recording to you via the platform.
Well, would you even want to record that? Would there be any purpose for recording it at the risk of leaving people's material digitally, their information somewhere?
Mhm.
Or is this one of these cases where you deal with the live stream and once it's done, it's gone, as
Yeah,
long as
well,
it's
and I mean, that's
encrypted?
probably the safer option, right? And particularly if they're the ones in control of the recording.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, we don't want students making copies of their case files. So I think it's better to just not record those types of things. Have it in an encrypted streaming situation that is protected, and then do the presentation as you've been doing it.
Well, in something like Blue Jeans or Bongo, those are internal. All those recordings are HIPAA compliant. They don't go anywhere because you're able to access them as the instructor, um, through the LMS platform. If it's something that's integrated into the LMS, I wouldn't have concerns about recording it there, because those are HIPAA compliant tools. I think where we get into trouble is when we're looking at tools that are outside of the LMS that they would be recording in. Me in particular, I would much prefer them, particularly if they're case presentations, that they're live so that I can ask questions and develop that response. So no, it's a really good point, Marty.
April's brought up a comment about, she is looking at doing just transcriptions. Of course, you want to use pseudonyms in that process, or encourage your students to use pseudonyms, and then people will be sharing the transcriptions of the case or the situation. Heather says, but can the recordings be downloaded? In WebEx, I believe you can download the recording. And that's why I say, for me, if it's client sensitive information, stay away from recording. In an instructional standpoint, do you need that recording once you've seen or watched the live presentation?
Yeah, and the instructor tools within the LMS, you can turn off the ability for the student to download that video, right? So it's something that you'd have to be real intentional about when building that assignment in the LMS, that their ability to download the recording is turned off, that they can view but not download. Sorry, again, just checking through some of the questions here.
I was going to say, if somebody else has another thing they'd like to go live with their mic and share,
Yeah,
that will
absolutely.
help us with our process and our flow here too, plus other folks. Come on, it's time to leave a penny.
Okay, so we have a volunteer or two. So April, I'm going to unmute your mic, and you'll need to unmute yourself, and then you can share with us.
Hi, everybody. I'm April. One of the things, I work mainly with school counseling internship folks or grad students, and one of the things that we're talking about is, getting their hours. I'm in Massachusetts right now, and all schools are closed until April 6th. But we still have people who are doing providing lunches. So I know that some of our school counseling folks are there and available when the kids can come pick up lunch to chat with them if necessary. So that's one way they're being able to still get their hours. And we're also talking about creating some groups on Google Meet for them to meet with students and maybe just talk about stress and anxiety and how to deal with being quarantined or being at home. So our restaurants are closed as of tomorrow. You cannot eat in a restaurant. So it's interesting. But those are just some of the ideas. We're talking about some telehealth stuff too, but just trying to get some ideas of how they can get hours. Obviously looking at doing any kind of education, CE stuff as well.
Yeah, thanks, April. I think it's a really good point. And as Marty was talking about earlier, there's a lot of students in practicum and internship experience who are kind of scrambling and concerned that they might not be able to get the hours they need to move forward and what their state's going to do with that. And I think, unfortunately for us, we're going to have to help manage some of those expectations because we're not going to know certainly what all of the boards decide, and some are going to be better at communicating that quicker than others. So providing them with support and resources and things they can do to continue to develop during this period is certainly a challenge, but can offer us some opportunities as well.
I'm following. I've got a lot of questions in query. I'm making copies of them so I can get to them. And I'll start with one that came up is Sharon Todd mentions, I'm concerned about individual counseling services. Do we need to offer a new informed consent? I've done some writing on this, and there is a person who sort of has the exampled informed consent for internet-based services, and I will try to get that to this group or the link to it, so you can see a copy of it. I think it's a good idea maybe to include those kinds of conversations with any of your clients if you're switching from a face-to-face to a telemental health format, that you're talking about the risks involved, you're talking about what happens if the connection goes down, you're talking about where you limit your hours in terms of your availability. Those kinds of things are all part of that informed consent, and I'll try and share this on with the group or share it to our Slack group that we have that we started, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. Eric, do you have anything on that in terms of informed consent for online services?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. One of the things I have been hearing from students is that, supervisors are saying, well, go ahead and just meet with your clients online. It's something that we do have to be careful with and we have to watch. And I know there's some webinars and resources out there coming out that specifically focus on telemental health and those specific issues. So I think there's going to be a lot out there for us to reference and take a look at as things continue to develop.
We have another question I want to pose, and this is for the group. I mean, and if somebody wants to jump in and add on this, or Jordan, if you want to speak a little bit more about this. Jordan posted that from a social justice perspective, is anybody running into issues with students who don't have access to laptops or internet at home? Some students only have a smartphone. I was thinking of encouraging students to access at the public library, university library, but they are closing down now. So that creates all sorts of problems for folks who don't have access to computers. At the same time, Jordan, when you mentioned they have access to smartphones, many of these platforms that we're talking about and have spoken about have, like Zoom, for example, has a smartphone app. So students can still do that with their smartphones. But your question is a good question in terms of the social justice perspective and access to technology. Anybody have ideas or have heard stories about how that's being handled?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add this part. I mean, my program is online. We have our face-to-face residencies, but aside from that, is predominantly online. It's assumed that these folks will still have access to the same things they would before. when you're looking at brick and mortar programs where students, may or may not need access, like Marty had mentioned, a lot of these, the LMS platforms even have their own apps that can be utilized to get online and do some of that work. But it, again, is not easy. I mean, you're not writing a paper on a smart device. Certainly not getting APA formatting right. There's just a lot that we need to consider in terms of what people will be able to access. But there are support and resources out there. There's a couple of them that have been posted in the chat. In terms of free internet being available from certain providers during the shutdown period. There are loan programs at some universities within some specific programs that are loaning out computers and technology. But that's not always something that's feasible depending on the type of need that you might have.
Yeah, we're seeing some resources posted from the APA regarding telemental health and the kinds of things, checklists that you want them to be involved in. Practitioners need to be involved in.
And again, we'll get this whole chat out to everyone as soon as this is done and make sure that everybody can access it.
Do we have any other questions? Any other ways in which you're tackling this problem of trying to switch things to online instruction? Well, maybe I'll just ask a question to the group. What courses are you teaching that you are seeing you have to switch over to online format? And you can just type it in the chat room.
Okay, so a lot of fieldwork courses. Some institutions, everything needs to go online. Challenged most by fieldwork courses, skills courses, diagnosis and assessment, human development, practicum, grief and loss. All didactic courses. So Marty, you asked and you have received.
I don't know what to do with that. Other than saying some of you have figured out some ways of doing this. How do you manage? And then there's a great question by Dominique about legally blind students. Some of you have figured out ways to manage this, these changes. So I'm curious to see if people will suggest some of these, or people are willing to come on and say, this is what I'm doing or what I'm thinking of doing, just to kind of toss it out to the group. Our university is closed till the end of the semester, through the end of the semester. They don't know what they're going to do with graduation. Originally it was only supposed to be until April 13th, and then they extended it through the end of the semester. We celebrate 50 years of the May 4th shooting that occurred here at Kent State. That whole thing has been delayed or dissolved. The rationale was that they looked at the progression of this disease, of this virus, and they didn't figure it would peak in our area till mid-March, till late March, early April. And that would be the peak in our area. So when I hear other areas talking about, oh, we're going to be back in 2 weeks, I don't know about that. Just the epidemiology of diseases, it might not get there, and the isolation, the social distancing might still be necessary for the disease. So I think you should prepare to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we kind of hit this point where some folks are saying, okay, now we have to do everything. Somebody said here tomorrow, everything's going to be ready tomorrow. So we're doing this kind of in a hurry. Um, I want to encourage everybody to utilize those resources that you already have, should they be there and available to you. Things like your instructional designers and curriculum developers, if you have them, your IT support staff, programs that are already doing this, may have some resources for you in how they've handled their transition. And they may be just ideas that kind of approach the gateway of where we need to be, but maybe can handle some of those technical things, right? Some of those kind of basic issues that you might run into. Somebody had mentioned accessibility. Generally, any institution that has an online program, an online course, or even hybrid or flipped offerings, has an Office of Accessibility who's helped, institute some of these changes. So you want to connect with that office and those representatives and find out what it is that you need to do to ensure that the materials that you post and how you develop your online course is accessible. And students will let you know. And you don't want to get to the point where you have a course that's developed and that's there and somebody says is inaccessible to figure it out, right? I know that a lot of institutions have review processes. You can develop your course, have it there and ready, and they can come in and take a look at it and let you know the types of changes that you need. Somebody had mentioned earlier that you can use captioning services on YouTube to help with some of the videos and ensure that you get at least a head start on captioning. There are instructional videos all over the place to learn how to do that. The captioning service that's provided by YouTube gets you at least part of the way there, and you got to go in and kind of edit and make sure everything's up to par. But there's lots of tools and resources out there. So I'm going to pause for a second and then try and catch up a little bit on the chat here. I noticed that Marty's doing a little bit of that. Oh yeah, so we're going to be posting a lot on the ACES website, on Slack, so that you have some, this particular chat and the resources that we have here, the videos, you have an opportunity to share with one another through Slack, some of the resources that you might have.
I just wanted to mention, I've been thinking about this, maybe not in the healthiest way, but I anticipate there's a good likelihood that I will get COVID-19. At some point, that's going to make me incapacitated I think, to teach my class. So it's not just preparing for next week, but it's potentially preparing to be incapacitated during a time where your students might or might not be incapacitated from the disease. And until they get healthy again, until I get healthy again, I've got to make sure that my classes continue on in some format for them to be able to do it. So I'm trying to prepare way ahead of time. And so in a couple of weeks, if my class is all set up, I can sit around and watch television and not have to worry about it. If not, I might be sick. So think about it in terms of ways that you can prepare ahead of time in case you get incapacitated from your teaching.
I think it's a really good point, Marty. Some of the resources that I wanted to talk about too, and you made me think of, I actually had in my head at the beginning and just kind of lost track of it. Your LMS is a lot of times, particularly thinking about Blackboard, Canvas, Desire to Learn, Brightspace, they'll allow you to schedule out your announcements and instructions to students. So I put in a lot of time up front in my courses to record instructional videos, to put together my announcements, to have my materials so they go out as the new week begins. And then before that new week starts, I might have things that I want to add or personalize based on the needs of the course and the particular students there. But I have most of the meat and most of the instruction already ready, right? So I can have that planned and plotted, for an entire 10-week course before day one, right? I know some of you or most of you are falling into this rather quickly, and you're not necessarily going to have time to plan out. But if you can get a couple of weeks out in terms of your planning and your announcements, I have announcements and reminders scheduled, just to keep in contact with students, to let them know to reach out to me if they run into trouble, how to schedule a synchronous meeting, how to get in touch if you're struggling, because that's bound to happen. Like you said, there's a reason that we're shutting down, right? That this is going to come up, and we're going to need to prepare ourselves and potentially and prepare our students for what they need to do and can do to reach out. So Marty, I noticed you put the Slack link up for everybody. It's open to join, so that you can join and add resources there. Slack is a really useful and really user-friendly tool that allows you to chat. It works off of hashtags and interest areas, so that you can get in and talk about and share and read what's already up there.
Yeah, we already have hashtags, a general discussion, a online teaching discussion, random if you just want to put random stuff up. Self-care, someone asked for that. There's a social, so if you just want to say, hey, this is what I'm doing, feeling a little isolated, but this is how I'm spending my time. We have a tech help hashtag, and we also have telemental health as a hashtag. So if those things come up, and you want to post to those areas, you can join the Slack group. It's on multiple platforms, including on smartphones, on desktops, and it can run like an instant messenger if you want to have it, so things come up, or it can just be an app that you open up and see what's happened with it. You can also share documents and files with Slack. So we've already got some folks who are sharing some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I like that it's not just a place for us to work on these kind of practical things that we have to do. It can be a great space for us to just connect as a community of counselor educators. So I really encourage everyone to check it out. Catherine just posted, I think it's important for us to be realistic about how much capacity we have to absorb new technologies in a short time. We need to be kind and patient with ourselves when this doesn't go perfectly. You're 110% correct. I'm a techie. I love this stuff. It's fascinating. Like I'm the guy at the store when new stuff comes out, and even then I tend to find myself getting frustrated if I can't figure out something quickly. So yeah, be patient, reach out for help, support one another. Make sure that you're reaching out to those resources that you already have available to you and leveraging those, because there's a lot out there. As silly as it sounds, look for those YouTube videos. It's not an impressive thing to say, but I like to mess around and play the bass, and I get online and then I watch somebody who's like 12 or 13 years old crush a song that I can't learn. But it's how I get further. It's how I get more skilled. Those videos are out there for you. There's a lot out there that you can learn just by seeing what everyone else has to share, and I think that's part of the idea behind this particular venture as well.
And yeah, I would say go ahead and please be gentle on your practice. Like Catherine was saying, that it takes time to learn these things, and also try to gauge yourself to learn one tool at a time, the best you can. Don't try to take on too many things at once if you can. The situation's not permitting that for a lot of us, but if you run into problems or questions, you can always use the Slack group, and you can post the question to the group. This is something problems like this, Eric and I kind of eat up and enjoy trying to resolve or come up with solutions for. So not that we're going to solve everybody's problems or we have that capability, but use the Slack group if you want, or email us and we'll try to help you as we can. I'm looking for any other things that have come up here.
Yeah, does anyone else want to share in particular, want to get on and leave your penny, as Marty suggested? Send us a chat and we will unmute you and let you share.
And again, I encourage you to go to the ACES form. I'll type it in again in the chat. It really is a short form, and it's just to leave your name, email, and the idea that you might have, or the way that you're handling it in your class, or the technology that you're using. I will write something about VoiceThread. I happen to like VoiceThread in terms of discussions. I prefer it better than blogging, where students can respond and also respond to each other using video and audio formats or pictures. So VoiceThread is something that I probably will submit on there and write about in terms of a way to bring your coursework online. But the form, I'll put the form on again, and I'll also put the Slack group address on again if you want to join the Slack group. What do you suggest for an assessment class? Question that comes up. So you're trying to teach online assessment, Christine, or you're trying to, when you mean assessment, are you talking about diagnosis? Are you talking about testing and assessment? Can you come on and have a dialogue with us? Maybe flip your mic on.
Let me see, I can. Christine, you can unmute it if you like.
Good. How's that?
We can hear you.
Okay. It's partially online now. About half the class is online with videos and things they have to respond to. But for example, they just completed the NEO-PIR, and we were going to score it in class. So I'm wondering how to do that. Do I score it and give them the scores and then we go over that, or what do you suggest there?
I don't know.
So
I
they
like.
were going to score it in class and score it because you would have the templates for them to score it with?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you get into all sorts of issues in terms of copyright. You know, you don't want to release those templates out.
No.
Wow.
I've got the templates at home and they've already taken the test without the templates. So I can fill those in and give them the results and they can look at those and we can talk about it.
Yeah, but they're losing. What pops into my head is maybe video yourself scoring.
Ah, okay.
So they can see the process of it being scored.
Yeah.
And they might not be able to do the scoring themselves, but they'll be able to watch that.
Okay.
How you score that instrument. Because that's, I know that's an important part of assessment.
It really is. It's something that's been really popular in the class before.
Yeah. Are you doing anything with them having to present results?
Yes, they've taken the Myers-Briggs, and then this assessment they were going to put together and come up with their own profile of themselves. What do they see in themselves using those two instruments?
Yeah.
There's also a spiritual assessment in there. And then they're also doing case studies where they're testing other people. They're taking like APA testing that's free online to practitioners. And they're doing like sleep assessment or depression or something like that.
Yeah,
and they're recording those.
The part that I was thinking about that for me is an essential part of that learning, and I'm trying to figure out how one would do it online, would be to present results to someone.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because I think
we do that.
we teach our students a lot about how to do assessments, and they learn the different ones that are possible. They learn the ethics involved in it. But there's very little instructional about, okay, you've got the results. Now you're sitting down with a client, per se. How would you present these results to a client? What happens when they get upset with them?
Right. And so what we usually do is let the students present the results from the NEO-PIR to peers. So they don't present their own results. They switch and then they present to each other. So they practice that. And then
Okay.
they have to record presenting the results to the people they're working with and doing their assessments with.
Yeah. Then you get into all sorts of FERPA and HIPAA issues
Right.
in terms of trying to do that technology based.
Right.
And who owns that file, and how, is it secure if you're doing a video of them? Like if you're capturing them presenting the results to their colleague in a Zoom video, how are you going to ensure that that material is secure and destroyed when it's done?
Right. In Canvas, we have a tool that records and then it vanishes in 2 weeks.
Oh,
So it
okay.
only,
And
Yeah,
it's not available to download anything.
I'm sorry?
And you can't download the file from there?
No, you just view it there and grade it there, and then it vanishes in
Okay.
2 weeks.
Okay, I'm stuck on Blackboard, but I think our university is looking at alternatives like Canvas. So,
Yeah, I mean, I was going to jump in and mention that too, Marty. I mean, if it's a an integrated tool in an LMS that's designed for that purpose, the ones that I think of the most are Bongo and Blue Jeans. Then it makes sense you can do it there. And we have students do this in the assessment and in the career course, because then they do like an interest and personality assessment that
Right.
they'll practice sharing those results. I don't think it's unreasonable either to think about contacting the publisher, whoever owns rights to that particular assessment, to ask whether or not you can deliver this online or provide those scoring guides or keys to them for them to be able to do this and explain the scenario. I mean, we've had a couple of different assessments that we've reached out about that students are permitted to score. Although we've just purchased the paper version at my previous institution.
Right.
And considering the circumstances, I think some publishers would be open to that. And if you have that permission on file, I don't think it would be a problem.
Oh, great. Well, that's a great suggestion. Thanks.
Thomas wanted to know, what is that called on Canvas? I presume he's talking about the recording kind of. Is that right, Thomas? If you're listening, you can type in chat, but wants to know, what is that called on Canvas?
Okay,
the
let me
tool
look
they're
it up.
using.
Let me look it up and I'll tell you.
Well,
Sure.
okay. Somebody says jigsaw or conferences.
Conferences.
Yeah. Okay.
I haven't used either of those.
It's a big blue button.
And it came in as capital B, capital B, capital B, big blue button.
It's a BBB.
It's a BBB.
That's the name.
Thomas,
Okay.
I know, it just looks funny. Great. Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing and for clarifying your question.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that'd like to get on and share? We have about 10 more minutes left that we can get on and talk a little bit. I did want to read this comment that we have on here. Just a 2-sentence reminder: be clear in expectations, gracious with assumptions, and understanding of errors. Frustrations happen from both sides. There's definitely a learning curve here for students as much as there is for us. So we have to be prepared for them to struggle and be really flexible. And I like the gracious with assumptions. Be really cognizant of the types of challenges that folks are going to face when we come into things and make these types of changes. So anyone else that wants to jump on the conversation and leave your penny?
Angela, repeat what?
She might have meant the tool from Canvas, which I believe was conferences or Jigsaw. Oh, the gracious with assumptions quote. Okay, yeah, I can do that. It says, be clear in expectations, gracious with assumptions, and understanding of errors. Often frustrations from both sides happen when we haven't been clear in our expectations. So I thought it was said really well. Yeah, and Kathleen just said, I took a phone call from a student who hates online and is freaking out about this. We need to be kind and supportive. We have to keep in mind that students who chose a brick and mortar university and a brick and mortar program have certain expectations. And it's anecdotal, but in my experience, those students really, they wanted that experience. That's why they were there. They were fearful or hesitant of the online experience for some reason, and this really changes the game for them. It puts them in an uncomfortable space. So we have to be prepared to deal with some of that.
One of the things that I did last night I had virtual office hours, which I've had them before and nobody shows up. But what I decided to do was have office hours through Zoom, and said, this is a time, no matter what class you're in, that you can test your hardware coming into Zoom and seeing if this is going to work for you. Because when it's time for class, I'd really like it so everybody could be there and we're not trying to solve technology problems during that time. So this is new for a lot of folks, especially those of us at brick and mortar. And as a purpose, I think it will be helpful for our students to get some trial runs on some of the technology. So if you have some things set up, whether it be VoiceThread, whether it be Zoom, whether it be a new platform for them, Blue Jeans or whatever, you give them opportunities to test it before they really have to do it. And I realize many of us really have to do it this week. I thought this would be easy for someone sitting in my seat to be able to do this, and I thought I'd have a nice, comfortable, relaxing, day at home, and it's been crazy trying to get everything. Every time I add something, it's sort of like, oh yeah, I forget I got to do this now too. So I guess I need to be gentle with myself.
Yeah, I mean, I teach primarily online, and just an interesting observation for those of us who are faculty who teach online now or primarily online, our students are home in large part, right? So we're seeing a lot of, I'm seeing a lot of participation, a lot of action and engagement. Whereas things used to come in, kind of trickle in throughout the week, and folks have different schedules and things. I've actually seen this really big burst in activity over the last few days, which is really great to some extent, and also seen kind of an uptick in folks who are experiencing difficulties just because of the current crisis, and trying to be really responsive is the other thing. One thing to keep in mind when you have an online environment as well, they don't have the opportunity to get to you. If you don't have those regular office hours online, as Marty suggested, the reaction time for you should be responsive to an email within 24 hours, right, is usually the guideline that we go by. We don't want students to feel alone or at a distance because we're doing this at a distance, right? So we have to be available to support, and maybe a little bit more responsive than we used to be. I remember walking into a meeting, and I'm not going to say where, but with fellow counselor educators, and walking in and just taking a glance at someone's computer that had 300 and some emails on them, and just kind of catching my breath in my chest because something like that would totally stress me out. So we have to be really responsive to just provide feedback and guidance, and even just support to say that we're here. If you have questions, that this isn't different from a classroom setting, and that you can reach me, and I will be there to support you through this process.
There was a question about accommodations, and I want to come up with I want to share with you another thing that I'm using. I'm not a big fan. I'm on Blackboard, and I'm not a big fan of Blackboard as a learning environment. I'm particularly not a big fan of their testing environment. So I am paying for an account at classmarker.com. And I should probably type that in. And it's costing me 20 bucks a month, but it's allowing me to be able to create an exam. And the situation occurred at our university this week where they were holding classes until Tuesday. And I had a couple of, I had a psychopathology exam planned for Tuesday night. And two students who needed accommodation wound up taking the exam during the day when classes were still in function. Then at 3 o'clock, the university announced that they were shutting down after 4:25, which meant I couldn't do my face-to-face exam. And I immediately got an email from one of the two students who was facing accommodations and going, now everybody else gets an extra week to study for your exam. So I realized one thing I had to do was switch this rather lengthy exam onto an online format, and searched for one that I could do outside of the Blackboard environment, because the Blackboard environment is very clunky to set up even quizzes. I've tried that in the past. So I stumbled upon this one, set it up, had my graduate student test it. Things seem to be working well. And now am creating and have created a second exam for this person, which is equivalent but can't be the same, because obviously they've seen all of the questions that they've had. And I'm able to set the timer to give them their extended time on this that they would normally get in an isolated environment to be able to take this test. So there are some things you got to do. Work with your student accessibility office. I mean, that was the first place I called Wednesday morning when this incident occurred, to get some feedback on what my responsibilities were and what I needed to do with that. And they are also facing a lot of questions about what to do in terms of dealing with accessibility.
Yeah, I think it's great ideas, Marty. You know, and I think it's a great topic, particularly to bring back up at the next webinar, is to look at what some of the testing and quiz formats, options, and what we can do inside and outside of the LMS to make some of those things happen that we might have already had planned. I want to be really mindful of time. We have about 3 minutes left until the end of the webinar. I want to remind everybody that the videos here will be shared. They will be up on the website within the next few days. I'm hoping sooner rather than later. There's going to be the resources in terms of the chat that was posted here. There's Slack, which will contain some resources. I'd encourage everybody to check that out, as well as acesonline.net. Again, you'll see that big banner for the special edition webinars that will contain guides, resources, and links as well. Anything else you wanted to add, Marty, before we sign off here?
No, you and I need a 30-minute break.
Yeah, I need coffee. I need to caffeinate properly.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being such a good community to each other in this process. It's a difficult time. I think we'll all look back at it one day and say, what were you doing during the pandemic? And I think this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate the caring aspect of our community, helping everybody deal with the kinds of changes they need to make.
I agree. It'd be cool to go back and say, you know, we were helping each other out, right? That's what we were doing. We were supporting one another in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, I had someone wise tell me one time that stop trying to answer questions in the moment, answer questions in the way that you want to look back at it 5 years from now in terms of what you did. And that will drive your behavior generally in a positive way.
That's impressive as a lens.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.